We're just finishing up here, but I'll start introductions a little bit since I've met all of you. My name is Preston Wynn. I'm basically I work for AirWatch, and I'm the director of our education practice, both for K-12 and higher education. So I spend a lot of my time going around talking to people. I'm a talker, so I enjoy that. So hopefully, the thing about this presentation, I feel like you guys probably don't want to hear much from me. You probably want to hear from an educator. So I'm on a panel today with Patrick Gill from West Point. And the reason Patrick and I decided to speak together today is, and he'll do 80% and I'll do 20%, or hopefully 90-10, but is because he's West Point, and it's a little different beast than a lot of your universities. You're all different, but it's a different of enough beast that they can sort of jump over a few hurdles that are maybe a little easier for them to jump over than for you. But the reason that's important is because I think looking forward to where things seem to be going, so I'm going to talk a little bit about trends and history and trends today a little bit. That's my role. Kind of where they're at is where we see people going. Not in all aspects, but I thought it might be interesting to sort of drum up a little conversation and maybe get your brains looking forward just a little bit. Does that make sense? I think it'll be pretty good. So Patrick is the manager of instructional technology at West Point. They've done, I'm going to give him a minute here in just a second to just sort of introduce what they're doing, what they've done already, and then we really are going to rely on you. No pressure, but we want some questions and some input. So this is super casual. I hope you walk away thinking, all right, I got a couple of new ideas, and then I'll feel like we were successful. But so let's get going here. Somewhat ready. All right. So the first thing I want to do is just introduce you a little bit to AirWatch, and this is literally 60 seconds. So for those of you who don't know what AirWatch does, we are the way that universities and schools and districts are able to deploy and manage mobile devices of pretty much any platform, right, over the air. So versus having to go to every school, touch every device, configure it for Wi-Fi, put applications on it, et cetera, you basically download our agent, or we send you a text or an email, or there's a web. There's many ways to enroll. You click a link, and all of a sudden you're enrolling in AirWatch. And now, because you as an IT person have put that device in a particular organization group, let's say it's a third grade math, or it's incoming freshman, and you've assigned certain profiles, applications, content, it just starts to rain down. So here's a good example. This is a true one. New university professor crossing the country, going from California to Pennsylvania. And en route, calls up the IT guy, Ben. He says, hey, Ben, blah, blah, blah. They're talking about all kinds of stuff. And he's like, I got this iPad. I'd like to get my email on it. And Ben says, all right. So tonight, it's just Wi-Fi only. So he's like, when you get to your hotel, just connect it to Wi-Fi. I just want you to go to the App Store and download this app called AirWatch. And when you download it, just put in your credentials, like you're logging into email. Okay? So he's like, all right. So he gets to the hotel that night, does that very thing, and as soon as he logs in, within a few seconds, the applications that the university wants him to have start raining down on his device. He's configured for email. He's configured for Wi-Fi. There's PDFs and PowerPoints and things that they want him to have. That shows up as well. So it sort of happens automatically, right? And this university professor is impressed, and Ben takes all the credit, and AirWatch gets none of the credit. But that's kind of what we do. So that's the good use case, and that's the kind of stuff we do. It's a little bit simplified, but that's what we do. So that's just a little bit of background. I just didn't want anyone to be sort of out of the... You got anything to add? Look like you're raising your hand, so I want to make sure.
No.
Okay. Big company. I only put this up here not to impress you, but to say that it's an opportunity, I think, it's to impress you a little bit. I'm not going to lie to you. But it's really to say we have the privilege of working with lots and lots of schools, both K-12 and higher education. And so rather than give you a product pitch of some kind today, what I thought would be helpful is to talk a little bit about some of the trends and where we see things going, just because I work with so many people, you know what I mean? And so it's not all going to apply to each of you, but I hope that as we go through this, and it'll be very quick because I want to get on and talk to Patrick, I'm hoping that it'll be helpful to you. We all know that mobility is here to stay. I don't think anyone's really arguing with that. It's just too ubiquitous in our lives. It's everywhere. It's like a third arm for a lot of people. We've got to find a way to do it. There's just an expectation there. Patrick makes some interesting points about this. So here's what I want to say about higher education. So these are some of the trends and histories that I see. First of all, y'all have been involved in it a lot longer than K-12, truthfully. However, your involvement is less sophisticated, meaning a lot of the strategy in higher education has been just granting access to BYOD devices to your network, which actually opens up some security risks. Ask the University of Maryland. So there are some risks there. And they've, I think, been acknowledged, but maybe not fully appreciated. And now what we're starting to see is a little bit more appreciation around some of those risks. And that's not meant to be a bag. I will say the other thing, you look down on number 3 there, fragmented IT departments. The truth is, AirWatch's business today in universities is basically department by department most of the time. So it is not uncommon for us, for a university to have 3, 4, 5 instances of AirWatch running, just because love you, but you guys don't communicate very well with each other interdepartmental, right? So that's one of the problems. It's not a problem, it's just we can save you a ton of money. And the truth is that the sophistication of a university is perfectly matched to the sophistication of AirWatch, and we'll talk about that as we go through. So I hope that's one of the takeaways on the product side. I have one takeaway I hope you appreciate there. The second one, what verticals are, what I'm saying there is that's the way AirWatch sells its products. So we sell to healthcare, we sell to education, we sell to retail, and we have different teams from a development perspective, from a sales and marketing perspective, that go after each of those what we call verticals. The interesting thing about AirWatch, about universities, is that you are really the combination of all of those, right? Sometimes you're hospitality, you're retail, you're healthcare, you're certainly education, you do all this stuff. And so you're finance, right? There's finance. I mean, it's pretty much everything that we do. You know, not very often do you fly airplanes, but other than that, it's pretty much that way. And the reason I bring that up, and I think I have a slide here on it. No, I don't. Is because it's important to understand that I think the history of it is when you look at services like AirWatch, there's this perception that there's only one flavor of it, right? Like it's fully, you fully enroll in AirWatch, and AirWatch controls everything that you do, and that's just couldn't be further from the truth. And we'll talk about that a little bit as we go through. So we are able to solve so many use cases, all the way from the hospital iPad that a doctor uses that not only has to be highly secured, but has to be HIPAA compliant, right? All the way down to the other end of the spectrum, which is an incoming freshman girl with a BYOD device who absolutely does not want you messing with her phone, and all she wants is just the apps. Like, what are the 3 campus apps you want me to have? We can do that too and not manage the device in any way, shape, or form. So, and everything in between, right? So we'll talk about that as we go through here. Obviously, BYOD is a dominant deployment. I mean, it's just you're purchasing devices for faculty and staff a lot of times. Out of curiosity, how many of you have heard chatter, at least chatter, about purchasing a device, iPad, something for every incoming freshman? Has anyone heard that? At least chatter. So we're hearing a little bit of that. We hear that, and that's one of the things I hope Patrick will talk about, because I think it's a really interesting discussion about why that's happening. One of the things that we're seeing is actually some gray area. We all know what BYOD is, and we all know what it is when we buy an institutionally owned device, like when the university buys it. And we treat those very differently. Like fundamentally, even in AirWatch's software, we treat those differently because they need to be. I don't want, if it's a BYOD device, I shouldn't be able to wipe it and like completely wipe it and get rid of all your pictures. That's not appropriate. That's like getting in big trouble kind of problem, right? So we totally handle that for you, give you the ability to handle that. But what we're starting to see now is sort of some gray area in between this BYOD device. Is it, and we'll talk about that when we talk to Patrick, is there this sort of a BYOD device that sits somewhere between BYOD and institutionally purchased? So we'll talk about that as we go through. One of the important things to understand is that one of the things we do specifically for BYOD is we publish a container on there. We don't manage the device, but we publish a container of applications that allows you to, and then that's all you manage. You don't manage the whole device because it's inappropriate. So there's that. And sometimes it's just a single application. It doesn't have to be a whole bunch. Sometimes it might just be our content locker, or it might just be a browser because you're doing online testing, or it might be, there's just lots of use cases there. Okay, so we're going to keep moving on here. So I want to start talking a little bit about, we're going to skip over most of these, I think. This is just a brief view into like sort of the ecosystem. And I think one of our challenges with higher education is to create, is to do a better job, I think, helping people understand that they have a lot of options, right? In terms of the types of devices that are out there, the way that they, the things that they manage on those devices. And so we need to help people develop more of a comprehensive strategy, not just within a department, but within a university. I think that's one of our big challenges that we have in the coming year or two. But let's get going here a little bit. I want to talk a little bit to Patrick, maybe hand it off to him at this point. I've taken my 10 minutes, and talk to him a little bit about, have him introduce kind of what West Point is doing now. Why don't we start with that? Why don't you talk a little bit, if you don't mind, about kind of where this all started, how it came about, and what it looks like today, and then we'll move on to where it's going.
Sure. It's kind of amazing if you think about it. If someone had said to me 3 years ago, you're going to have iPads all over your campus, I would have laughed at that. I wanted it to be that way. I thought it probably should be that way, but I never thought that it would happen. The Army doesn't approve of the device because it doesn't meet FIPS certification, so we can't put it on our network, et cetera, et cetera. And we're about to, in another 2 weeks, deploy 6,000 devices to all of our cadets and most of our faculty. 2 years, that's how long it took for that to happen. Well, why did it happen? Well, we started out with a couple of hundred devices that we got from the War College. They just wanted to try them out. They wanted some faculty to issue them to some cadets, try them in classes, see what happens, see what the cadets think, etc. And when we got the 200 devices, my first thought was, we need to manage these devices. Because I know enough about the Army to know that if we're going to go anywhere with these devices, we're going to have to manage them, because the Army is going to say, you have to manage them. That's just what's going to happen. And also in the back of my mind, I kept thinking, there's nowhere to go but up. If we have 200 now, next year we're going to have more, and then we're going to have more. And then this little sort of voice started talking off in the distance from the history department about an alumnus who donated a big bunch of money to them to take the history of warfare, which is their flagship textbook that they've been writing for about 80 years, and create an electronic version of it. And once that happened, and that got underway, before you know it, suddenly from 200 iPads, we're at 1,200 iPads, because all of the seniors who are taking that course and using that book have to have a way to use that electronic version that's being created and financed, etc. And so the cadets really liked it. They liked it a lot. And so did the faculty. And so those faculty talked to other faculty, and other faculty began to develop their own things. So foreign languages wrote a Spanish textbook as an iBook. Because at that point, the only platform really that was, publishing platform that was viable for that was iAuthor. There's a bunch of them now, but 2-3 years ago, iAuthor was it. So that's what they used. And suddenly the Department of Military Instruction, which was the military guys who trained the other half of the cadets' education, decided, why are we printing out all these PDF files and distributing them to the cadets when we could just create an electronic version, put it on this iPad that they have. So the superintendent turned around somewhere earlier this year and said, in the fall, every cadet at West Point will have an iPad. That's 4,500 cadets, plus we have staff and faculty to support. So suddenly we have a big deployment.
That's how it goes at your universities too, right? Someone says everyone gets an iPad and it just magically happens, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So.
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously, you know, like Preston said, we jump some of the hurdles, but we create other hurdles for ourselves. And, you know, as we hit that, I mean, we'll definitely, I'll talk about those. But, you know, our model for doing this is that, you know, cadets don't go to college and pay for it. They are paid to go there. because they make a deal with the government that if the government will give them this degree, they will serve 5 years in the Army. So it's a trade-off, and part of that is that getting a book allowance, which is what they get to pay for their textbooks, allows us to sort of leverage that particular model. So we decided the way to do it was increase the book allowance for this semester and give them enough money that they can buy that iPad. So they buy it. We require them to buy extended Apple Care with that device when they buy it. That way Apple takes care of it if it breaks, so we don't have to manage that part of it. I really strongly urge you to think about that. If you're going to deploy devices, especially if they're going to be devices that you're going to have to manage or that you're buying them, extended Apple Care is a very good thing. What you get for the money is really great. So that's how we did it. And essentially, one of the hurdles we don't have to jump over, and most people chuckle when they hear this, is that our students tend to do what they're told. So when we tell them you got to do this, they do it. And so
maybe we could talk about that for a second.
Yeah.
Some of the differences. So you can kind of see where, because they are West Point, and just by the way, one of the trends that we're seeing is that, and we actually have someone in the audience here today who they have a department in the university who the students come in, they actually purchase their own iPad. In this case, they're not funded. They buy their own iPad. The university actually purchases their textbooks for them. So it's sort of this collaboration, but it's their device, right? But so it's sort of this kind of sit in the middle kind of a BYOD device. They fully enroll in AirWatch. All the textbooks are pushed down. So it's a managed device, but it's a BYOD device. So it's just kind of interesting. And the question really is, why is that happening? Why would that even happen here? Why are we seeing this sort of BYOD device that's really treated like an institutionally owned device for a while? I mean, I have my ideas, but I'm curious, why do you think that's starting to happen? There's more than one example. We've got it at West Point. We've got it at University of Cincinnati in some spots. Thoughts on why that might be happening from you all? I'll give you my microphone. We got to get you guys talking here.
Well, one reason is supporting the device. BYOD gives you support to begin with, right? But if you say bring your own device, yet we're going to manage it for you, it's just an easier support mechanism.
Right. Yeah, it's almost like these devices are being purchased. They are BYOD devices, but they're being purchased specifically to help with school. Does that make sense? And that's what we're starting to see, because that's what's needed. I think the other issue in my mind is, the classic BYOD device is a phone. Phone's great. We can't do without them, but it's probably not the only tool you would want in your bag for 4 years of college. So what we're kind of seeing is this acknowledgement finally by universities and students alike to say, you know what? I probably need a device that will serve me better when it comes to doing research, writing a report, having full access to sort of different kinds of applications that are maybe a little better than they are on a phone, but also an acknowledgement that they need to be managed at some level so that they can get the app, so that they can have access to the network. One of the big issues that we've got going on too is you guys, I'm sure you're aware, but you have a big bullseye on your back from hackers right now. This is a big deal. I'm not trying to make everyone scared. It's just reality. Verizon had a report this year. Hacks on university gone up almost 400%. Right? So there are some security risks there, and the nature of your networks and the fact that any device can connect, that's like a heyday for hackers. And so I think there's generally start to be a little more appreciation, because I get it. Like, your concerns are not the same concerns as your faculty. Like, university professors, they're the center of the universe sometimes, and they're not as worried about security. In fact, I told you I was going to tell this story from University of Wisconsin. I have a colleague that I worked with way back before graduate school at WordPerfect. Does anyone remember WordPerfect? All right, I did Suite 8 in French, Dutch, and German. But so Jacques and I worked together. He's from South Africa. And so I ran into him at EDUCAUSE last year, frankly. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I haven't seen you for like 20 years. How's it going? And we started chit-chatting. And they had an issue as we were talking. He was asking me, like, what's AirWatch and what do you do? And I told him, and he's like, oh my gosh. I don't know if you're aware of this, but they had a situation. I guess there's some virus that comes in, and it's basically takes over your laptop, and then you have to pay a ransom for it to release. Are you familiar with this? So he said, quote, several professors lost their life's work, end of quote. So, if they had just done this one thing, just that one application, we're not managing a device, take your My Documents folder, drop it in there, and now we've got that managed, and we give you all kinds of fun stuff you can do with it once it's in there, problem solved. So I think there's starting to be a little bit more appreciation that there's other use cases out there that we need to solve. So kind of interesting. Any other thoughts around BYOD, before we move on with Patrick a little bit here and ask him a few more questions? We're doing well on time. Anyone willing to share kind of what their deployment looks like right now in their schools? I mean, any of you that are already putting mobile devices in your universities, anyone willing to just kind of give us a heads up on what you're doing? Different, similar?
I'd be curious how many IT departments supervise devices for their faculty. So in other words, do you issue your faculty? Are there certain members of the faculty, members of the teams, the staff, whatever, who are expected to have this device on them at all times so they can be contacted? Probably IT people too. That you all are responsible for managing. And how many of you use BlackBerry devices to do that? Anybody? Not anymore.
Poor BlackBerry.
Yeah, well, of course, we're a couple of years. It's funny. We're on one end we're pushing things very fast. On the other end we're very traditional. So we had BlackBerry devices in the hands of all of our senior staff, and because all of them are Army officers, so they have other things that they're doing besides teaching cadets, and it was costing us a ton of money to manage those servers, to keep those devices working and all that. The BYOD thing allows us to just do away with that. Because basically, if someone has their own phone and they're willing to allow us to manage it, just that piece, to put the container on it, to do the email, problem solved. We don't have to pay for that anymore. It's really cost effective that way. I'm just curious if anybody does that.
I think we had right back here, and then I think Diane was going to say something too. Okay. I would say that's the common thing right now. That's really common. And did you want to?
So we deployed AirWatch also, and as President was saying, we started with one college, right? And then there was another college and another college. We initially had gone out to determine what we want to do to manage our mobile devices. And so we're at a point now that I say we have to have an enterprise solution for mobile devices. And we are going to be working with AirWatch and how we're going to do that enterprise wide, because it's only getting more. Our college of nursing was the first college that started using AirWatch for the iPad. And this fall, they're going to roll out 500 additional iPads in their college. So we need to get this enterprise solution and work it out.
Yeah.
So that's just, the nature of the beast, right?
It's true.
Yeah, it is, and the fact, like I get it, like I've dealt with faculty. I mean, students are separate beasts, but faculty as well, and it's tough, and I think, but I do think some of it is leadership. I have to be honest with you. I think some of it is just saying, look, you want access to our network because of this, and this. You're going to enroll in some flavor of AirWatch because we have to protect our back end. We have to protect, we just can't have literally 50,000 devices hitting our network and we have no idea if the device is jailbroken. We have no idea if it's got a virus. You know, it's just all this stuff.
Mhm.
It's a heyday for hackers out there. And again, not trying to rule through fear. What I'm telling you is this is what we're starting to see. Just the early cusp of that realization of saying, you know what, we've been doing this for 8 years, and we've got that down, but now we're starting to see these problems. We better stay ahead of the curve, right? And that's what we're starting to see now. Yeah. Okay.
First is, how do you manage Apple ID? Is that something that you
Yeah.
recommend them to use maybe like point information, or how
Okay.
do you control that?
Yep.
Based on
Right.
Yeah.
whatever.
Thank you, Apple. Yeah.
The second question is, what is the life cycle looking like for the devices that you're providing for the students and faculty? How often do you replace them?
Place them out. Okay. Are you K-12 or higher ed?
Higher ed. I work at NYU.
Okay.
And we're kind of in that gray area as well. So
Yeah.
our freshman class, who are teaching and learning, our two-service teachers are required to have iPads as part of their
Okay.
school model, but the other programs aren't there just yet. So we
Yeah.
bring them in. Faculty will buy devices with their personal funds, those are IDA, so we put money, those being managed, the others we help them in their
Right, right. That's part of the struggle is too is, you know, grant money. And people just buy stuff because they get grant money, which is great,
Mhm.
but then you got to support it, or at least they expect you to at some level, and that's another challenge for sure. Okay, so 2 questions. I don't know, Patrick, if you've got anything to add, I can certainly. Why don't you try and address? So the Apple
Well,
ID was one question. and
We
then-
started out, like I said, we
life
started
cycle.
out with a couple of hundred devices, and naively we thought, well, you know, it's only a couple of hundred devices, so we can do this using Apple Configurator, and we can, you know, set up accounts. So we basically created Apple IDs for all of those devices, so that we could manage the passwords naively.
Yeah, okay.
Institutional
Institutional.
Apple IDs.
Right.
Well, that lasted 1 semester because people changed their passwords. We couldn't keep track of them. We quickly came to the realization that trying to do that was ridiculous. What we should be doing is allowing them to use their own Apple ID and their own account, because what's the point of the device? The point of the device is that it's a personal device, right? So we should let them have their music, and we should let them have what they want to have, and figure out a way to do the things we needed to do, which is where AirWatch came in. This was, you know, back 2011 or so. This AirWatch was a young company. They're a young company. This industry is a young industry. If you think about it, right, 2-3 years ago, it was just beginning. So,
Does anyone remember when the first iPhone came out? First iPhone, anyone? 2007, but we really didn't see them start to scale in corporations, let alone university, until 2009, which
Right.
is when iOS 4 came out, and that made a big difference. So 2009, guys, we're like 2-3 years into this really is all. And
Yep.
what we've been able to do and what you've been able to do is actually pretty phenomenal. So.
it is. It's amazing what's happened in just a short time. So, but maybe not so amazing when you consider. I know I was out the other day at the convention center, walking in that back hallway towards where they had the round table discussions, and there's a whole wall there that used to have pay phones on it, and some of the kids were standing in the hallway looking at them, going, "What are those?" You know. Anyway, so what we did was we managed Apple IDs by not managing them. We basically said, use your own Apple ID. And then I went out and started doing some homework about, well, how do you manage these devices, which is how we came to AirWatch. Because they allow us to containerize the stuff that we want to control, that we want to protect. And that's really what you have to do. That's really how it works.
Like in terms of, I have a device,
Mhm.
and you want to, I don't know the configuration of AirWatch and how you.
So what happens there is, like literally, is this a device that you're going to purchase or one that they bring to the table, the student?
Either or.
So let's say they already have it and they've already entered their Apple ID and they got a bunch of music and stuff on there. Done. When they enroll in AirWatch, the way that Apple operates in Apple's world, and it's very different for Windows, very different for Android. You know, we support all those platforms, but in the world of Apple, Apple doesn't allow us to install anything. It's going to give you a prompt, the user. It's going to say, hey, you're about to enroll in an MDM, and there's like a standard disclaimer that it says, right? And they say, okay, and then it starts to happen. They have to put in their Apple ID, right then. We don't touch the Apple ID. We have nothing to do with the Apple ID. It is an Apple thing. It talks to the Apple service. We have nothing to do with it. Where it gets a little complicated is when in K-12 and to an extent in higher ed where you're sharing devices. You have a cart of devices, and kids are coming in, they're grabbing a device, using it, and then the next hour a different kid uses it, because that would be two different Apple IDs. And that's where you would have to do what Patrick's talking about. There's an Apple ID for the device, but in that case it doesn't really matter because no one wants music on it. It's a different issue, right? But we allow different students to check in, check out a device so that when they check it out, they get the apps that, like, we know it's them, and they get the apps that are pertinent to them and the content and everything else. And then they check it back in, and it's now ready for the next person, kind of thing, right? And that's used a lot, even in higher ed. University of Indiana, University of Pennsylvania does that quite a bit. So in terms of life, and I'm sorry if we've answered all your questions, and we can definitely keep talking about this. So there's sort of us having to dance around Apple and the way they do things. So, and we're pretty good at that now. In terms of life cycle, other than damage. Going back to the warranty thing, these devices seem to have absolutely no trouble lasting 4 or 5 years, even with pretty rugged use.
It's true.
In Apple's world, anyway. Windows 8.1 tablets, we've not seen. They're just newer, and they haven't had we don't see them on the scale yet. Chromebooks in K-12, we see a lot of. They don't have a long track record yet, so we really don't know what to tell you there. Mm-hmm. But so in Apple's world, life cycle's pretty solid, really.
Really the only device that's become unusable at this point is the first generation iPad. And there aren't very many of those out there now. But everything from the second generation on is totally usable.
Yeah, it's funny. You can still buy iPad 2s, because they're so inexpensive.
And we have a lot of cadets who buy those because
they're cheap.
We give them $350. They use $200 to buy the iPad and keep the rest of the money.
Bam!
We know that.
Smart.
It's,
Any other questions do you have? Comments, questions about? We good there? Great question. There's a lot of detail here, guys. So in terms of sort of getting through the nitty-gritty of how to do this, we should probably talk offline about that. Because when I talk, if I have this slide that shows all the, everyone has this, like a slide, all the universities that use AirWatch or whatever. And when I pull that slide up, I usually say, look, I'm not trying to impress you here, even though I kind of am. It's really about every one of these schools uses us differently. You know what I mean? Like that's an important point. That flexibility and the granular control. You're going to need to tell us, here's what I want to do. How do I do this? We've been doing this for 20 years. We started a long time ago doing rugged devices for Walmart. You know what I mean? Way back in the day. And now we're doing these really elegant smartphones and tablets and laptops and things. So we do have a lot of experience. We love to share it. But we also we're going to be asking you a lot of questions, frankly, because we have to understand what you want to do. One of the common trends, by the way, that I see is universities will, again, this department by department, IT department by IT department purchase and thought. But in addition to that, they'll start with something free like Apple's configurator, because they don't know anything. Maybe you haven't done any of this stuff over the air before, right? It's your first time doing it. So they'll learn a little bit from that, and it's free and it's great. I think that's a great way to go. But you have to plug every device in every time you want to change it and stuff like that, right? But it does teach you a little bit about MDM. And then they'll move on to something. Let's say you're using Apple products. They'll use a product like AirWatch, but one that only manages one type of device, like only does iOS, right? And invariably, because we know this is always going to be a heterogeneous group of devices, right? In our schools and both in K-12 and higher ed. Then they move on to AirWatch. That's a pretty common thread. A lot of them come right to us, but when they don't, I tell our guys, relax. Because what happens is your sophistication increases, the types of use cases that you want to solve expand, right? Mm-hmm. You realize, oh my gosh, we were supporting iOS devices, but now we need to start supporting Windows and everything else and Android. So what are we going to do? I would say 30 to 40% of our business comes from people using another product. And that's fine. It's just I'm just letting you know that's a trend where you're growing and learning, and we're sort of that solution that you can grow into. You know what I mean? So that's important as well. Yeah.
So currently, what we do is tell me the difference
Yeah.
comparison, 'cause, you know,
You know VMware bought AirWatch, right?
well, I just seen that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I'm just saying
Okay.
that, you know, BYOD, point or bringing your own devices, you're not managing those devices.
Right.
Who the heck wants to touch every device for every device preference?
Right.
And that what we currently are experimenting with is even with our students, you know, I mean, here, you get a student desktop, here are your applications. Faculty, here, you get
Yeah.
a faculty desktop. So what's the difference or the value?
The value together. I think they're different use cases. And I don't know, you guys use VMware too, don't you?
We do, but not
the
across
same
the
way?
enterprise.
Okay.
Just in departments.
The reason, the difference is, so the message of like VMware, for example, is we will give you a consistent user experience across any device type, right? Anything you got will give you this consistent user. But what they had a lot, the reason they purchased AirWatch for $1.54 billion in March was because they said, too many of their customers were saying, oh, that's great, but we kind of need to help manage these devices and configure them in some way too. Not always, but sometimes, right? We want to configure them for Wi-Fi, they want to have email on them, they want to have all this stuff. So not every device needs to have that, but there are lots that are. So they basically, in their end user computing department, they had this big gap, and AirWatch helped fill that gap. So now we have, they feel like, and we have this complete solution where we can give you the VDI experience that you're looking for to make things simple and easy. But the other truth is people kind of buy iPads for the native experience. They do. I mean, right? So so AirWatch helps you manage that native side, and then VMware would help you have this consistent experience when you want. So it's kind of best of both worlds. You can have your VDI, but then you can switch right to a native application from the App Store that you don't get in the VDI experience, frankly. There's lots of great apps out there. So you get kind of the best of both worlds, and AirWatch is going to help get that person onboarded, make sure that again that you're mitigating some risk in your university. Really, AirWatch at its heart of hearts is a security company. We want to make sure, like, we help people be FIPS compliant. We help people be HIPAA compliant. So that's not all we do, but we really say we do 4 things. We help you manage devices. We help you manage email. We help you manage content, meaning PDFs, PowerPoints, all that kind of stuff. And something else. Applications, did I say device, apps, content, and email. So application management. So it's a different use case, and there'll be situations where you only use VMware, and there'll be situations where you only use AirWatch, and there'll be situations where you use both, in my opinion. But they're just different. Like I said, we're sort of that hand that reaches through your network inside the device and helps you do stuff inside the device in an appropriate way, right? If it's an institutionally owned device and it gets lost, we're the ones that help you wipe the whole device and get all the data off it, so everyone's covered. If it's a BYOD device, we could just pull that container off he's talking about, just the apps we gave you, or just the content we gave you, and nothing else. We couldn't touch it if we wanted to. So that's kind of what we do. We configure it for Wi-Fi. We can tell you if the battery's almost dead and how much storage is left on it, all that kind of stuff, right? How many iPads you have, how many Windows devices you have. We can do all that, asset tracking, everything. So we do all that for you. And then the VDI experience obviously has its completely separate story. And it's a great question, though. Did that help a little bit? I mean, maybe we'll keep talking. All right, let's keep going here a little bit. Patrick, can you talk about, I know maybe we've sort of covered this a little bit, but what are the use cases that you're seeing and the impact on students having these mobile devices in your classroom?
Well, if you can picture our typical cadet walks around with a backpack. Every one of them has one. And they carry their books and they carry their laptops. And that's 50, 60 pounds of stuff they're carrying around, as opposed to an iPad. It's made a huge difference there because we've been able to, as we've proliferated into, creating these iBooks and distributing them, that has made the cadets' life much easier. The faculty like them because they can look for apps that address the particular thing they're trying to do, and they can ask us to make those apps available as part of our app catalog that every cadet has. It makes it very easy for the cadet to get the app. And because we make it part of the app catalog, it's part of the container that he was talking about that AirWatch puts down there, which means when we take that device out of AirWatch, all of those apps go away. So we can either purchase apps through the volume purchase program and give them to the cadets and take them away when they're done with them, or we can just say, here are some apps that you should use in our catalog. They use them, we still can then remove all that.
So that's a big, just
Yeah.
to accent that a little bit, that's
Yeah.
a big recent change in Apple's world, is that AirWatch can now not only push an application, in the past when you pushed an application out, it was gone. To your question from NYU, it was associated with that end user's Apple ID permanently. So when they left, if you paid $5 or $10 for that app even, it's gone once you push it out. Now you can pull it back and reuse it, so that you get to keep that money that you spent as a university. So
Apple
we help
was
you manage.
actually listening, when we were complaining about the fact that, we were spending money and losing it.
Yeah.
I was telling you the 200 devices that we bought initially, we bought everybody a $50 gift card to the Apple Store and said, buy your apps with this gift card. Like we thought we could manage that, right? By having the Apple ID and controlling the password.
You're saying
it
the
isn't-
government wasted money? Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying that, yes, that's what I'm saying.
We're all here together. It's our
But we
government.
figure these things out, right? We do eventually figure them out. We say, oh, no, we can't overtly waste money like that. And of course, I have a personal stake in it because, as I say, every time we buy something that's overpriced, I'm essentially spending my own money because I'm a taxpayer too. So,
Yeah.
Okay, so I think I just put a connection together as far as app purchases and distributed individual apps instead of using vouchers through the administrative Apple system. Are you able to do volume license purchases
Yep.
in that way
It-
and use AirWatch to push the volume?
That's right. But you
That's
still
right.
use Apple. So Apple gives you this token basically, and then you pull the token into AirWatch, and then you start managing them, right? So you distribute it to this,
Right.
25 copies here, 50 there, and we keep track of all that licensing for you.
Sure.
So you make your VPP purchase. You can literally by app see how many copies of it you've purchased in
Right.
AirWatch's console once you do that. But
another thing that AirWatch has helped us do, which we wouldn't have been able to do without them, is these textbooks. I was talking about the electronic version of the Art of Warfare. That's a significant expense and investment in creating that book. The only way that you can distribute books, iBooks, to iPads is to use the iBook store. That's what Apple tells you have to do. However, AirWatch allows us to create an internal book catalog. So we can distribute those internal books, the ones that we own, without making them public as part of the iBook store. This is really huge for us because we are making a significant investment in these textbooks. So
and that's true for applications as well. So we have so when you're going to AirWatch's console, you basically have an interface to Apple's App Store and the Google Play Store and the Windows App Store, right? So you have all those interfaces, and you can search on and see all the applications just as if you navigated there directly. And then you make in the case of Apple, you make a VPP purchase, right? And then at that point, now you've bought a certain number of licenses, and then you can start pushing it out. So that's kind of how that works. We give you that interface.
Right.
There's also a concept of internal. In corporate, this is huge. I mean, this is gigantic. If you're a pharmaceutical company, you've probably created 50 to 100 applications of your own volition, and you use AirWatch to push them out willy-nilly. I mean, everybody, whoever gets them, all the sales guys get this app, these guys get this app, research gets this app. It's super common in corporate. It's becoming more and more common in both K-12 and, higher ed first of all, and then K-12. There's companies like Moto Labs and Crescerence that basically give you platforms to be able to create your own applications. Students are creating their own applications now, and we give them a store they can publish these things in, so that they're only, like if you're in K-12, it's there could be some issues there putting an app on the public app store if you're a third grader, right? And maybe your date of birth and your name and stuff are in there, and your parents wouldn't be happy. So you can publish it internally. So there's this sort of internal and then public application distribution, which is really key.
Yeah.
I think that's a really exciting frontier, the one that will only boom and grow for sure.
Yeah, I would say if you come away from this with anything at all, know that it's gonna mushroom. There's nothing else that's going to happen except it's going to just grow like crazy. And what you have to do, what we did fortunately, was we got the management piece in place in enough time that we were familiar with it, so that the idea of deploying 6,000 iPads next week doesn't have me freaking out. It has me a little nervous, but I'm not where I was, last year when we had the 1,200 and we said, oh no, we're now.
But just the fact that you
Yeah.
could even deploy 6,000 iPads in a week, that's what we do for you.
Yeah,
right?
it is pretty cool.
And then manage them ongoing. So,
Yeah.
great point. Thank you. We're getting to the end here. Questions. Let's kind of shift gears here, and we've done a lot of questions already. But is there anything that topics you want us to discuss a little bit that might be helpful to you? Or, yeah. Where are you from, by the way? Okay. Right. How does that work? Yeah, so AirWatch, whether you're at Panera Bread and connected on your home Wi-Fi or the network, we can see you. But when you go offline, if you don't have 3G, we can't, right? So in our console, as an IT professional, you can see how long it's been since that device checked in.
Right.
In terms of content, applications, if it's a native app, there's no problem. In terms of content, the way our content locker works, think of, my bosses would kill me, think of Dropbox, but secure, right? If it's needed, it can be secure. So a piece of content can actually be, you see a ghost image of it, you download it to the device natively, but we still keep control of it even. If it's sensitive, right? If it's not, it's fine, doesn't matter. But if it's a sensitive document in any way, let's say it has your grant information or something, right, and you want to keep some control over it, you can have it natively on the device, but our content locker will not allow you to copy, paste, screenshot, do anything with it, right? Same with email, so we can secure email in that same fashion, but only when and where you need it. I think that's really important. I mentioned Moda Labs, who just happens to be one of our partners, and maybe some of you have worked with them a little bit. They're like, well, they're not like Blackboard, but they create apps for universities. So they did NYU's, and they've done a lot of people's. They did a survey recently of a couple universities. Guess what percentage of students put a PIN on their phone? Anyone want to take a stab? Just like a 4-digit PIN even, just like something simple on the phone itself. 15, 2, anyone else? Brave? No other, you're all chicken? 3. It was less than 1%. Like nobody is doing it. I know, can you believe that? I sort of understand it though. I don't like having a PIN on my phone. Honestly, if AirWatch didn't force me to have it, I probably wouldn't have it. And I'm not proud of it. I'm just being honest. So the point is, one of the interesting frontiers that we're really looking at tackling, and we're doing this now, is sort of app level VPN and even authentication. So you've got to put a PIN in for a module, but not on the whole phone, because that's sort of a personal thing. Maybe it's great practice to do. Even a 4-digit PIN is very helpful. But if you don't do it, if for example, I was at Georgetown University recently, and the CEO was talking about they had a student basically scrape the registrar's webpage to create an app to add and drop classes for students, right? And they were a little nervous about that, and rather than like sort of slap his wrist, they embraced him and said, hey, let's work on this together, which I thought was brilliant. That's the kind of stuff we need to be doing. But in the process, we talked about the fact that if you're putting your student ID in on your phone, you don't have a PIN on your phone, you don't have that's a big risk actually. My friend Christian, who I work with at AirWatch, said that when he was at Auburn University, he had a guy who broke up with his girlfriend and then went online. This is brutal. Went online and dropped all her classes. Like 2 or 3 weeks into the semester, just to be mean. What an ass, right? I couldn't believe that. But anyway, so the point is, your student ID gives you access to your finances, to your class, and all kinds of stuff. And I think we've just got to start appreciating that. Again, don't be afraid of it, but just say, how do we mitigate this risk? And I think there's some really interesting frontiers there for us as well, in terms of protecting their identification, but still have given that really good user experience on their device that they want. Or we have to basically, I have this little slide here. I guess I should probably show, but. We have this desire, really, where we need to do this. We really have to balance security and enablement. Sometimes you need total security, like if you're in a hospital. Or another interesting one is athletics. Athletics guys, they have these playbooks on their iPads. They got these football players or whatever, basketball players that are taking them to a bar, you know, and then they leave it there. I mean, we totally secure this data for them. That's an interesting use case. So you've got the security end of things, but on the other end, you just want to, you know, as Harvard saying, they just publish an app catalog, right? Because on their freshmen and everyone else's devices, because there's like 50 Harvard apps and only like 3 of them are official. And frankly, if you go to the public app store, you can't even tell which ones are official. Some of the ones that they look very official, but they're not. Some of them don't look official, but they actually are. And so we help publish those in an app catalog. And it just simplifies, just that little thing. You spend a lot of money on these apps, and now you're really improving adoption. It's a small thing, but you're really improving adoption, and so you're getting the most out of your money, and now your kids are, anyway. So there's a lot of fun things there. Other questions as we finish up? We got like 5 minutes. Another topic, question? What did we forget, Patrick, that you want to say to people?
You know, when you're talking about security, we looked at it from the standpoint of we aren't allowed to use these devices on our network. I said that earlier because the Army hasn't approved them, right? So what we're doing is we've essentially put them outside our network. So we've moved our Blackboard to Blackboard.com hosting, which we can do because Blackboard.com hosting is at Blackboard, and they guarantee that the data's secure, et cetera. And we enroll the devices from the internet. So we put our AirWatch server in the DMZ so they can access it without touching the network. We talk to our network for authentication purposes through the firewall, but via a cable, because we have really paranoid security guys, you know. So essentially, they don't touch our network, but they skim on top of it. So we've altered our wireless network so that when the device uses the wireless system, which is enabled by pushing certificates from AirWatch to the device, so that the certificates identify the user and allow them to connect to our wireless network, but they're put into a VLAN that gives them an internet connection. So basically that's how they manage it. That's how we manage it. And we keep it out of the network, keep it totally separate.